this week's edition of In Layman's Terms. My guest today is Mark Mitchell from Rasmussen. And just so you know, Mark, I've been following you for a long time on social media. So this wasn't just like a, hey, let's get a guest this week who knows polling. I've been following you. I've seen all the nuances of your posts. I've seen you push back at some people. I've seen, so I've seen it all. And I'm with you 100%. The thing that I'm also very impressed with is that you were a Navy submarine. As somebody who has who's claustrophobic, I always when I used to be a venture capitalist, I'm like, if somebody was a Navy submarine, I would find a place to hire them. It didn't matter where, because I know they can deal with stress. So these are the two things I wanted to mention. But so our show.
Thanks so much.
Of course, and it's I mean it. This is heartfelt. Our show, just Mark, so you know, we do things for people who are not wonkish like me. We do things for people who are in their 30s and their 40s, who don't have time because they're raising families, they have jobs, they want to do a little bit of exercise here and there. They don't have time to get into the details and wonkishness of so many issues out there that exist, whether it's the Middle East or life sciences or vaccines or whatever it is. They just don't know. And they just follow whatever they see randomly. And my feeling is we want to educate them just a little more on things. So in a perfect world after today, my audience will look at a poll, know where to look, what to look for, and how to interpret it. We're not going to talk methodology. I mean, you and I can have methodology talks one day over a beer, but we're not going to talk methodology and numbers and others. But so this is really my goal. But obviously, before we do that today, we need to talk a little bit about Charlie Kirk. I spoke at TPUSA events last year before President Trump. I was a backer of the organization last year, so I met him twice. A huge loss, I think, for our country. I wanted to hear your opinion of this as well, and also a little bit of your background, because I'm always interested in your story.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll get rid of that first. Yeah, I was a nuclear submarine officer, Naval Academy, and I would have stayed in. I loved it, but the Bush presidency wanted to send me to Iraq or Afghanistan for a short tour, and my wife didn't sign up for that. So I got out and did some private sector work in investment banks. And you might not know this, I actually spent 5 years at a private equity venture capital family office investing. And so I really like that space, but wound up working for a unicorn for a few years that got acquired by Walmart. And so I had a Walmart corporate career. I led a team of 100 people. And then I had to leave because of the vaccine mandate and COVID reorganizations. And just through personal connections, I knew the people that were running Rasmussen reports. Scott Rasmussen left the firm in 2014. And this will segue into the polling discussion later, but the primary requirement for being able to do this job well is just integrity. It really isn't rocket science. And so the people that were running it knew that I had that. As for Charlie Kirk, I don't know him well personally. I was on his show a few times. I went to America Fest last year. It was a great event. I think it is the pulse of MAGA. He is very much at the center of the MAGA movement, because so much of it was bringing in new people to really, quite frankly, a stale and stodgy Republican kind of small tent, turned it into a big tent with a lot more crossover voters, independent voters, people who are unaffiliated with the Republican Party than I think most people still think to this day. And he is an absolute horrible, catastrophic loss. I don't think Trump would have won if it had not been for Turning Point USA and the amount of grassroots stuff that they do. So I'm not sure. I think the organization will still be okay. But because of that event and a few other events, I feel like Americans' opinions are changing really rapidly right now. And that's what tends to happen. People stay the same for 10, 15, 20, 30 years, and then all of a sudden there's really rapid swings. And right now, I think there's anger and a demand for justice. And I have some numbers that we could go into later to back that up.
I love that. This has been my big question. So one of the questions that I have is, I divide the American population and like a bell curve. So I'm talking your language now. 20% on the left is crazy. Probably 10% on the right is crazy, and everybody's right in the middle. And I'm always trying to get the pulse of the middle, because if you notice
Mhm.
elections now, it's all about independence. The way they've done the registration laws, you go to the DMV, you get your license, and now you're a voter. So
Yeah.
people go independent. So I'm always curious about what the independents, and of course, your polling is going to show us what these independents are thinking,
Yep.
and I'm very curious what they're thinking. Of course, for me, with an agenda, which is how do I get the independents to have Republican as their default vote, rather than today, at least in my state, where the default vote is Democrat for independence. So your polling is going to show us what that swath in the middle is going to think, and I'd love to hear that later.
Yeah.
But so tell me, so you're going to understand my term here. You come in, and Rasmussen is 2014. People are saying they're biased, and Scott's on TV all the time, and he's
Yeah.
and so on and so forth. So now you got what we say is kind of a turnaround in our world, in our private equity / venture capital world. So what did you do? How did you do it? I see the numbers are incredible, and again, you got me following you, and I've never met you before. I just loved what you were saying on social media.
Well, we have a really big digital footprint, definitely now more than we had before. And Scott left in 2014. I didn't come in until 2021. This was my first presidential cycle. And it's a very, very, very small firm, very minute. There's only a couple of employees. And a lot of the stuff, we have a managing editor who writes the stories. We have content management person. We have some processing help. We have our president and owner, and then there's me. And so if there's business development, I have to do it. If there's videos that have to get edited, I have to do it. A lot of it dropped in my lap, and that's very different than having a team of 100 people at Walmart. But I have a passion for the work. And there were some things I did to make our methodology. I don't want to get into the methodology details,
Of
but
course.
what we were doing was it was expensive, and I made it much, much, much less expensive without sacrificing accuracy. And then I leaned into our digital brand, which we had not had a spokesperson since Rasmussen left in 2014. And I found, as I was going through my first presidential cycle and understanding the sheer depth of disingenuous lying, just bold-face manipulation of people, and the way that polling is a very big tool in the gaslighting, the pro-status quo lying, and as you know, as your viewers can probably understand, they don't know what to think about polls. They probably all hate pollsters because they feel like they're being lied and manipulated to. There are many layers of lying and many ways that a poll can be used. And I experienced all of this, and so I started talking about it, and that's what really resonated with people. So we built a 120,000 YouTube subscriber channel. And I've only been on Twitter for a year, and I've got like 500 million impressions or something like that. So it turns out, and this segues well into the talk about who those independents are and what the right and the left is. People are angry at a system that doesn't work. The problem is they're lied to a lot, and they're confused about what the solutions are and who to trust. So I agree with you 100%. There's these long tails of very pure ideology. But the right now, people paint that as far right or conservatism. It's very common sense, centrist, fiscal responsibility, law and order type things that everybody should agree on. And the funny thing is that if you take those ideas and test them with the entire country, people do agree on them. It's like, should we have cheating in elections? Well, 90% of Democrats say no, but they're told that the Republicans cheat, like Elon stole an election with Starlink or whatever. And then on the left, you have what they will say anything at all in order to manipulate people to stay in power. Now, the problem with the left and the right is that Donald Trump does not have a supportive system. He does not have an infrastructure that wants the same things as what he wants. And what he wants is popular with 60, 70% of the country. The left has a very well-oiled machine that will ubiquitously accept every position that the left adopts and shove it down people's throat. And so the people in the middle are very confused because they think there's this red team, blue team thing, or they hear narratives and they have to adopt them because of consensus-oriented thinking or because of brute force manipulation of narratives. Things like Charlie Kirk is hateful. Well, no, Charlie Kirk is not hateful. He's one of the least hateful conservative activists ever. What would you prefer, Milo Yiannopoulos? And then everybody believes that, and all of their narrative dissemination devices support that, and it's very different on the Republican side. And so I don't know where this is necessarily going to go, because everybody thinks that Trump changed the Republican Party. He increased the Republican vote. Republican registration is skyrocketing. And maybe, but I don't think those people are going to turn out necessarily, because they want the system torn apart and fixed. And the Republicans aren't doing that right now.
Yeah, just to emphasize what you said. So I had the honor of speaking four times, twice before the president and twice before the vice president in my state here. And what I like to do when I do this is I actually walk the halls, and I meet people, and that coalition that has been put together by the president, which is referred to as MAGA, and of course with all of the negative implication that has by the press. These were multi-ethnic, multi-social, and multi-age people, and every one of these rallies felt like I was going to a baseball game, not a political rally, in the sense that it was family oriented. It was people with the best of intentions, and they just wanted things to work out. So
Yeah.
you're right. They do paint. We do get paint. The movement gets painted in a certain way, and as you say, there's not an equivalent propaganda machine other than one man in the White House who tweets at 2 a.m.
Yeah.
Although his team is doing a good job. But anyway, you're right about this. I'm torn between getting into politics, but also I want to talk about polling.
Let me add a point to just illustrate what you said, is that on the right, there are fringe lunatics, but
Sure.
the community is not that. And everybody who's been to one of those events knows it. And what I think unites everybody is just a shared set of values. Call it American, call it Western, whatever. It's like, hey, I would help a person that fell down. I would help the old lady cross the street. I will return my shopping cart, and things like that. And that's why I think there's so much happiness and unity. Now, on the left, the thing is that you look at, again, this Charlie Kirk assassination. The vast majority of Democrats, for lack of a better word, hate it, don't like it. They don't like political violence. They might not have liked Charlie Kirk, but they're human enough to understand that he has a wife and kids, and it's just a horrible act of violence. But the problem is that they have all of these people on like TikTok, right, out there laughing at Charlie Kirk. Now, so what you have is if the left wants to paint the right as violent extremists, they will use embedded federal assets. They will use the mouthpieces in the press. They will use a congressional subcommittee to go after and paint January 6th, use that to paint MAGA as extremists. It is a intelligence gaslighting media operation, a psychological operation. Now, when the right is trying to paint the left as lunatics, which I think they need to do because unfortunately they adopt these very vocal positions increasingly, it's all independent people like us, on podcasts and independent media. And they're losing their ability to perform those operations, and independent media is getting more powerful at painting them as extremists. So I think they're in a tough situation that is going to, it's like the quartered animal, I think, is what we might be seeing.
And as we all know, cornered animals are very dangerous. I had a previous guest where we were talking about the future media and how the current media is not doing their job. And you're right, more and more people are getting turned off by the repetitive, very with zero amount of adding anything, right? They're not adding anything. They're just all repeating the same thing, and it's getting old, and people are realizing it. And that started obviously with the last election. So that's very true. Again, um, I'm always concerned, and I'd love your opinion about this because you have the advantage of looking across, not just at one thing. I'm always concerned about the echo chamber because we all now with social media and even before we all sit in our own echo chamber. And my echo chamber, as much as I try to make it broad, all I saw the last 2 days was awful human beings celebrating the death of a 31-year-old man
Yeah.
on TikTok and X. And honestly, they don't look normal. They don't sound normal. They have that kind of evil look in the eye.
Yep.
They're celebrating, So is it the echo chamber, or am I missing? I mean, who are these people, and what are we going to do about that? And maybe it's
So
just
I,
the echo chamber, right? I mean,
I I've spent a lot of time in echo chambers, and they can be useful or they can be dangerous. And I think if they're dangerous, it's because it's people who have divorced themselves from logical thinking, intellectual honesty. I don't know what to call it, but um, I've been a member of a right echo chamber for a very long time, and it's changed over a period of time. Back in this particular one in 2015 or 2016, it was just blind obedience to Trump. And it was interesting to watch it develop as it dealt with its own misinformation, things that were directed at it, as it tried to parse its way through the Russian collusion information, as it suffered attacks and went through COVID and went through election integrity. And I think that particular echo chamber, which was formerly a Reddit subreddit, has become very good at vetting information, at rapidly identifying and working through things logically. And that's like a discussion. And then on the left, though, I think some of these echo chambers, it's like they're trying to score virtue signaling points, or they're trying to seek validation, or they're trying to find some kind of like consensus, like this hive mind tribe thing. And there's no rational thought or pushback, because I don't know how to describe it, but that's what it feels like. If you go to Blue Sky, it does not feel like human beings engaged in rational thought. And I think that's very dangerous. And the reason, too, is that, a lot of people ran from Twitter when Elon Musk took it over. And I think Twitter's been metamorphosizing into something that's very powerful and good for humanity. Because when you see those former echo chamber ideas get subjected to people who are actually trying to have a discussion, they completely wither and die. And so I think that's one of the reasons people have like migrated. So it's like the right went through a period where it tried to improve its thinking and get better at this rational thought and discussion. And the left is now going through a phase where they're running away from that. And again, I'm painting with a super broad brush. I think most people are like I said, in the Democrat Party are very like decent humans. They've been manipulated for a very long time. I think the insane ghouls that we're seeing right now are people who are seeking validation or engagement, or are being pushed by algorithms. And I think there's an aspect of bad actors at play too. But there is an inherent problem fundamentally with some of these people, especially with younger ones who are coming into a very, very fraught social fabric is not what it was when I was raised. And the 18 to 29-year-olds are having a major problem with this because the system doesn't work for them. And I forget the numbers off the top of my head, but we asked a question, whether the murder of the United Healthcare CEO by Luigi Mangione was understandable because of the high cost of healthcare. And 28% of America said it was understandable. It was like 38% of 18 to 39-year-olds. And a pretty good chunk of Democrats, I think it was like 35 or 40%. And so there's that, right? And those people aren't out there posting insane things, but they're susceptible to that kind of treatment. And I think bad actors know this. Like if you've spent any time on Reddit politics, Reddit's, people don't talk about it often. It's one of the top 10 websites in the US, and it has one of the largest political forums. And the way Reddit operates, anybody can be an anonymous moderator that has just complete dictatorial power to control narratives by shutting people down, banning them from subs, downranking search results. And that's where the extremism is. And those people could be CCP assets, they could be KGB, they could be deep state, they could be, nobody knows. And so I think that's the problem, is that on the left, they have all these communication and thought dissemination devices that are like just completely able to be taken over by bad actors.
Yeah, that's this is very interesting because I'm a very my demeanor in general is very stable. I don't say anything. I ask questions that are just usually fairly innocuous. And I did get kicked out of Reddit. By the way, sneakingly, they didn't say, "Oh, you are now not able to come here." I can't log in, and
Oh,
it's
wow.
incredible. Yeah, yeah.
I
You know,
haven't done
so
that yet. I'm going to have to try.
and it's probably the moderator who decided. You know, they probably and I was not me. I was whatever name they assigned to me. But my questions were really annoying because I was trying to get to the truth in many subjects. And I think so. So you're right. So it's an echo chamber. But
Yeah.
but do you think, again, as somebody who's in touch with the pulse out there? I mean, there's an echo chamber, and I understand, and there might be people that are thinking, you know, the guy was a troublemaker, and so on and so forth. God bless his soul. Uh, but what about the actual lunatics that in glee, with
Yeah.
glee, will make a 2-minute TikTok dancing in their kitchen, or celebrating, or selling T-shirts. Um, what's that? Is this that fringe that I'm referring to, and we just need to ignore them because we need to make sure the bulk of America understands what's happening?
Uh, I'm a free speech absolutist, but there's a line where, like, we all have rights, but they're often bumping up against each other. Right? You know what I mean? I referred to on the stream earlier this week when Dick Cheney gave the order to shoot down civilian airliners on 9/11. He gave that order. Those people have God-given rights, but like so do other people. And so we do have laws that limit free speech, and there are and obviously there are political ramifications for it being perceived that you crack down on those things. But again, I think there's reasons, and I know less about TikTok than I know about Reddit, just because I've been a Redditor forever. And I got kicked off of, people just don't understand how absolutely horrible this is. And I think we'll find that in this particular case of the shooter of Charlie Kirk, that he was radicalized on something online like either TikTok or Reddit. And I would assume Reddit and not TikTok. I think TikTok, the algorithm works different. It boosts sensationalism in those people. There's an aspect of capitalism going on there, is my guess. And maybe it's a feeder for people or a pipeline into longer discussions. But I wonder how really radicalized you can be on TikTok, because it all seems like one-way passive. Reddit's a discussion. And so, for instance, here's my experience. I got booted off. My favorite fiction series is Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time, and it's one of the subreddits I was on. And like 5 or 6 years ago, I got kicked off of the main Wheel of Time subreddit because I was just discussing the book with somebody else. And they're like, well, hey, this female character that's a Tom girl, no, she's actually a man. I'm like, well, no, and here's all the reasons. And I got kicked off, right? Because I was arguing with a tranny. Well, the trans community on Reddit is massive. There's a 500,000 person subreddit called Ask Transgender. And people will sign on to that and ask questions of other people who are transgender. And a lot of those questions are things like, hey, I'm 13 and I don't feel comfortable in my body. And you follow that person's discussion, and 6 months later, they're on, sex change hormones and wearing chest binders and stuff like that. And so that site has 12,000 people a week and 600,000 interactions a week of people coming to it. And that's just one of them. Then there's our trans. And so what happens is you give these kids phones, and sure, maybe they go on TikTok and they look at that, but then they're gonna get to Reddit too. And then Reddit, they're going to see all of these things because it permeates every single one of these other subreddits, the dominant narrative. Because a lot of these moderators are across multiple. And then I think this is what happened to that kid. He had the perfect American upbringing. His father was a sheriff. His family was Christian. He lived in a beautiful family. You see this woman's Facebook posts that, you know, they had a strong relationship with their church, is my understanding. They sent him to college, and it's like a few months ago when he was 22, close to, like, far along in his college career, they say, oh, I don't recognize him. His viewpoints are different. And like, how did that happen? And you could say, oh, you can't send your kids to college. Well, was that his college where Charlie Kirk was there and there were hundreds of his classmates there to watch a conservative activist speak? You know what I mean? So I think it is the online stuff, and they have to go after it. And hopefully, the Trump said he's going to RICO George Soros now this morning. That's huge news. I would love to see it happen. We need to know how these funding networks operate. I think at some point you're going to find a crossover into these online communities, and it has to happen.
Yes, and you know, I had a guest who had written a book about George Soros, you know, the man behind the curtain, and it's not just George, it's not just George, but I think there are networks out there. You know, usually when these kind of things happen, you have logistics. I mean, you're a military person, you have logistics and you have financing, is what it takes. And this doesn't, you know, this is not a lone wolf kind of a thing. It's not that easy. You know, I've been in war as well, and I understand that. So I definitely want to dismantle that whole piece. But there's a especially in French, and I'm going to move to Poland. During the Nuremberg trials, there was a French philosopher. You know how French philosophers tend to be also politicians, and they tend to be everything, right? And he came up with the word after I think one of the, I think it was either Rudolf Hess or one of these, you know, one of these awful Nazis, and he said la banalité du mal, which is the banality of evil, because you
Yeah.
look at this kid, and that's exactly what that is. It's the kid next door. You know, it's the person, as you
Yeah.
said, you know, that had a good middle class upbringing, and out of the blue they become evil. You know, which is basically what happened with a lot of these Nazis. You know, from 35 till 45, they become absolute monsters. So anyway, that's kind of
Yeah.
you know, it's a term I like to use a lot. So polling.
Yep.
So my audience, they will every once in a while look at a poll, or somebody on the news will say something about a poll, and they'll say, "Oh my gosh, I didn't know that the Trump policies were so unpopular." Because I'm okay with them, and I'm sitting here in my middle class area, and you
Oh,
know, this is just the latest example, but um, how how should someone look at a poll very quickly, you know, top, bottom, middle, and decide if this is credible and I should spend more time on it?
I'll get to that, but
Okay.
let me give you this other part.
Okay.
So first off, the reason I don't want to talk about methodology is because there's actually three other pollsters, Rich Barris, Matt Towery of Insider Advantage, and Robert Cahaley of Trafalgar.
Sure.
And we've
Know
all
them
kind
all.
of become friends and decided to form a new organization called the National Association of Independent Pollsters.
I heard about
And I
that,
can tell you
and I'm
that,
proud. I'm proud of you guys for doing that.
oh, thanks. Yeah, I think we're actually collaborating right now on a poll that's coming out very shortly on the generic ballot. So we're going to hopefully start getting more headlines. But what I can tell you is, after having talked with them, we all do something different. We all have different methodologies, and yet we're all pretty decent. And speaking just personally for our track record, polling is an art, not a science, and it's difficult. And it's impossible to get 100% accuracy. Like, if you show me a pollster that has like average error of less than 0.5% over 2 decades, they're just copying and making guesses. Like, they are putting in the numbers. They're not giving you the signal, because when your average poll has a plus or minus 3 margin of error, and usually the real result is closer than plus or minus 3, the way the confidence interval works. But but it's just impossible to know because people lie to you. Things change at the last minute. It's raining on election day. All kinds of things happen, right? But over time, like we were one of the only pollsters that ever had Trump up a couple of times. We had him up like 2 out of 30 times in 2016. And we showed that he was a lot closer. And we got slandered as right-wing pollsters because the system wanted Hillary Clinton to win. Then we got slandered as right-wing pollsters because our final poll had Biden +1, but the average of all of our fall polling was Biden +6. So we were actually too far left in 2020. And we had him way down, Trump way down in the swing states, and we were still called far-right pollsters. And then this time out, we literally were the only ones putting out, we put out a lot of polling this cycle, and we had Trump +2 almost every single week, and we were exactly right. Now, the biggest miss, and we've had some of the national popular votes within like 0.5%. The biggest miss we ever had was 2018. I wasn't there for that, but we were a couple of points off, too favorable to the right. But that was also, I think we'll find in retrospect that things like Act Blue out of nowhere, all of a sudden getting $1 billion more than it had in the previous cycle has a massive impact on the way people vote. And also, we know that there was a Russian collusion hoax election interference. Okay, so all that being said, anybody listening to this can be a pollster, which is part of the challenge. You could literally go to a soccer game and ask people questions and put a poll out, and it'll be statistically meaningless, but it'll look like a poll. Or you could actually do a little bit harder work and, put a Google survey up or pay to email it to people and poll, right? That's all a poll is you take a sample and then you say, okay, well, this sample isn't quite like the rest of the country. How do I weight it to make it look like the rest of the country? So there's some guesswork there. You have to know what your sample represents, and you have to make weights to try and match it to the population. And so then you publish it. And you disclose a certain amount of information, and people will say, oh, well, you're not disclosing enough. We don't know exactly how your methodology is. We want to see all your raw data. But that's all manipulation, because there's no matter of disclosure that will change the fact that somebody has integrity or not. So as a pollster, I could oversample with this data source because I know it leans left. I could just go in and change answers. I could delete data points. I could do anything in the world to make those results look exactly like I want and publish it. And then the problem is that, okay, well, it's just my integrity. I want to see a signal. That's what I'm looking for. I don't even look at the data until it's finally weighted and I check it. I'm like, does this make sense? And then if you have confirmation bias and you see the results and you're like, those results don't look like what I want, well, you could go in and change it. And sometimes you get a bad sample and you're like, well, do I publish this? It looks ridiculous. Or you could go in and look and say, oh, well, the independents I got were way too liberal. You could go out and sample more. That would improve your poll. Or if you had confirmation bias, you could do that in order to confirm your bias. So that's the way a pollster can screw it up. Now, a lot of these pollsters report up to a managing editor, like Nate Cohn has a boss at the New York Times. And I've seen circumstances where I guarantee you the managing editor told him to make changes to his polls. Like he went in and reweighted something, in my opinion, in order to make it look like Trump was going to lose Pennsylvania. And I suspect that that's what happened. That's just my guess. He put a big op-ed about why he did it, why he chose not to wait for recalled vote. Long story. We don't have to get into that. So you have this layer of manipulation by the corporate press that a lot of these pollsters report up to. And then the final layer of lying is cherry picking. And this happens all the time. Even Trump does it. If I show that Trump has a good approval rating, he'll quote Rasmussen reports. If Quinnipiac shows that Trump has a good approval rating, he'll quote Quinnipiac. The problem is that you can't even wipe your rear with Quinnipiac. It's garbage. Their track record over time has been absolutely, absolutely horrifying. And then you know what we've seen with pollsters is that perennially over the last decade, they always underemphasize the support for Trump. And why is that? Well, after seeing it happen a third time, I think it's because the establishment system hates to see an anti-establishment candidate win, and they will use every tool in their toolbox. And so that's why the polling is still bad after 3 cycles. Because if they were off with Hillary Clinton, and they knew they were, they all wrote, oh, sorry, we missed, and here's why we think we missed. But then you correct for it. Easy. Oh, I weighted independents a little too low. I should have increased that. And then you change your model. But no, like with Biden, it was even worse. And then with Trump this time, it was again worse, but they got better at the end. And I think the only reason was because we put out as much polling as we did. They all, Reuters and Ipsos were like 7, 8, 9 points to the left of me. Washington Post, ABC, Washington Post, 7, 8, 9 points to the left of me in September. But by the time they finished, it was only like 4 or 5 points. So, so that's the problem, is that if you're going to play around in the polling game, you should, if you want to get into it, you can look at the published results of the poll are usually delivered in a format called a crosstab. That's short for cross tabulation. And so if I say, all right, well, who are you going to vote for in 2024? Kamala Harris or Donald Trump? And then report a number. Well, it's 46% Harris, 47% Trump. That's the top line result. But how do men vote? How do women vote? Well, usually a crosstab will have other columns for those demographics. You'll generally see gender, age, race, party, ideology, education, who they voted for in 2020. That's a very important one that I used. And so, for instance, you could see, all right, who's everybody that voted in 2020 for Biden? And now, do they say they're going to vote for Kamala Harris or Donald Trump? And oh, look, Kamala Harris is only getting 85% of the Joe Biden 2020 vote. That's a very important finding. And it's some of the things that you can see in crosstabs. So how that's useful is that often in those crosstabs that are supposed to show every question that was answered, I can go in and look at ABC, Washington Post's poll, who uses the Reuters Ipsos panel, which is an inferior panel. And I can say, well, I have Trump up 2, but they have Harris up 4. Well, why is that? And then I go to Trump favorability. And my Trump favorability is like 48 approve, 49 disapprove. Their Trump favorability is like 27% approve, 64 disapprove. So it's like, you can tell, does this make sense? This man almost won the 2020 election. He won a presidency in 2016 too, and yet only 27% of the country approves, has a favorable impression of him. And so it's ways like that where you can go in and yourself build confidence or not in this particular poll. And what we've seen is that there are certain pollsters over time who have a track record of just missing to the left. And they did it again this time. And they'll slander us as right-wing pollsters, but I was within like a point, which is about as good as you can get. So I don't know if that's a positive or negative, but like, it's, what I can tell you is assume that you're being lied to. And even if a news site like Newsweek is quoting Rasmussen, there's probably a layer of cherry picking going on. But on the issue polls and not election prediction, most people don't even poll those questions. Like, there is very much selection bias in what questions get asked. We're the only pollster that asks questions about election integrity. We're the only pollsters that ask questions about whether or not the COVID vaccines were harmful to people. And we were the only ones that asked a lot of questions about immigration, like really early on, and Joe Biden's mental capacity and all these other things. So for me, it wasn't a surprise when Joe Biden was going to do really bad. And then, I knew. I was polling for Kamala Harris for years. Everybody knew in February of 2022 that this guy needed a mental exam. It wasn't a surprise. And of course, none of those people reported. The entire mainstream media news acted completely surprised in June of 2024 when Joe Biden completely whiffed. Where it's like, no, 70% of America wanted him to take a mental exam 2 years prior. Like Mark Halperin in March of 2024. He was like the best journalist on earth because he had the courage to question Joe Biden's mental capacity. 70% of America already knew, like they don't use any of those issue questions. Republicans don't come to me to try and understand the voters because they don't want to win. And Trump has a popular agenda and ran on it. And that's why he was successful, because he understands Americans in a way that others don't. And the pollsters choose not to, over and over again.
So I'm gonna summarize
Yep.
what you were saying. So first of all, it's like mutual funds. You look back at 20 years of records, and you got good years, they got bad years, they got good years, they got bad years. somehow you should average and decide where you're going to put your money, is how I give advice financially to people. So this sounds exactly the same way. There's a little bit of what have you done for me lately,
Yep.
which we in the venture business always use with the headhunters. You know, it's like, if you give me a great CEO, you're great, and if you give me a bad CEO, I'll never use you again. And so, what have you done for me lately? So if I asked you for, again, for my audience, and you gave us great detail on a lot of things, but if I told you what are the three top things as a layman that I'm going to look for in a poll before I spend more of my very important time digging into it, what am I looking for? Top, middle, bottom, or maybe three top things, or whatever. You just three things. Maybe
What
they're
I would
five.
say is
Maybe
like,
they're five, Mark. I don't want to limit you, but
um, it's just there's I don't know how to answer this because I talk about polling for multiple hours a day, right? Right is
okay,
ultimately the
okay,
problem. But I would say if people don't want to put in the work of understanding or digging beneath the numbers, if you're getting any polling information from a mainstream media source, I would assume you're being lied to. And every once in a while, Charlie Enton on
fair.
CNN tells the truth, but then on the very next week, he'll lie to you 100%. What people should do is, if they're interested in that, find, and I'm not pushing myself on them, find
Mm-hmm.
somebody out there that they know is astute enough to understand polling and follow them on Twitter is probably the best way to consume polling information.
Okay.
Because the number one thing I would look at besides track record, and track records could always change. Look at Jan
Sure.
Seltzer. Jan Seltzer had a long career of predicting Iowa elections, and then she threw it out the window with her own
Good.
confirmation bias, missed by
Yep.
17 points. She
Yep.
could the amount of ridiculous mental gymnastics that she had to go through to come up with that result. And I think it's just because she wanted to be one of the MSNBC cool kids, and it's really sad.
Yep.
So if you want to put in the work, follow me and hear people talk about it. Rasmussen
Sure. Sure.
_poll. No, but I'm saying, what I would look for then is for a human who did the polling to accompany it with commentary. If you see that, then you have a chance at understanding how they interpret the results. And that doesn't always happen, but I'll give you a very good example. So everybody says Atlas Intel, they're the most accurate pollster. And that comes with a ton of caveats. First off, they haven't been around forever. Second off, they don't put out that much polling. Third off, most of the polling they put out comes on the very last day of the election cycle after I've already wrapped up my work. They poll in like the last 2 or 3 days, which I find suspect because half the country's already voted early. So, and they generally stop answering polls, right? But they are very, very, very accurate on their final polling set. Now, they are very close to me. They got within like a half a point of my final number or whatever. But then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, in May, they came out with a Democrat +9 generic ballot. The generic ballot is, hey, next midterms, are you going to vote for a Democrat or a Republican? And that's a very surprising finding because the Republicans won by 3 in the fall. So that would represent a 12-point shift towards the Democrats. And I admit that I am now seeing a shift towards the Democrats. My generic ballot was Democrat +4. But at the time, I had Democrat +1. So they were picking up more than twice a move to the left than I was in a period where Trump had a very high favorability rating. So I said, wow, this doesn't make sense. And a lot of people were really concerned because Atlas has been called the most accurate pollster by themselves. But that was a stunning finding. In the polling world, everybody's like, what on earth? Because it didn't reflect what people were seeing around them. Well, I went to their Twitter feed and the guy, I forget his name. I forget the guy's name that is the head of Atlas, but he put out a commentary on why he thought. And it was about the renaming of that U.S. ship that was the Harvey Milk into something else. And he said that there was going to be LGBT backlash over that. Well, that story was a very, very, very small story. And so to say that like a Democrat +9 would be a Democrat blowout where they pick up like 20 or 30 seats, it's just utter electoral bloodbath. And yet the pulse of the nation was nowhere close to that. Everybody was kind of happy that they got through the period of like tariffs in April, and in the beginning of summer, people are usually kind of chill, and so everybody immediately looked at his interpretation of that poll, and they lost a ton of trust because everybody assumed that now, because they finally took money from Bloomberg, that there was some pressure to show positive to Democrat results. So again, if you're going to dabble in, just assume you're being lied to, or find somebody to parse the commentary for you. And I'm not recommending me. If you follow me or Rich Barris or any of these other people, you'll learn to read the crosstabs. You'll learn to spot aberrant results. But it's work. It's a lot of work to really understand this, and it's only one data source that you would look at. If you want to predict elections, you could look at registration gains, you could look at the betting markets. All of them have their place. But not Alan. Don't look at that guy, Alan Lichtman. He's bad.
So Mark, I'll tell you what I do. Of course, I did a lot of biostatistics my whole career, so I'm very comfortable with stats. But I'll tell you what I do, and please, if I'm wrong, tell me, because that's what I've been telling my audience. I look at the size of the sample. The larger, the better. I look at likely voter versus registered voter, and then I look at the standard deviations. And if anything feels, if it's this 400 people sample of registered voters, I don't look at the poll. I don't have time. So
Yeah.
What I've told my people is the largest the number, the better. Look, when I try to get a drug approved in the FDA, I'll want a 5,000 person trial, not a 1,000 person trial. It's just that, numbers are, you get more signal with more numbers. So again, likely versus registered. And of course, at the end, their standard deviation. You guys use another word, but I use standard deviation. And
that's tied to the sample size. Yeah.
So what do you
right.
think? Am I being too simplistic for my people, or do you think it's a good place to start? Plus what you said.
That's like checking the first ingredient on the ingredient list of the product. It's a good place to start. I would say what you'll see is that exactly. So I would say that over time, with the Trump realignment, the difference between registered and likely voters, in my opinion, is shifting in a way that I don't really know. But I don't poll registered voters ever at all, and I think the likely voter model is more predictive. But that's subjective, right? And it probably changes. Now, if they're trying to give you election results and they're polling all adults, that's bad, because that includes illegal aliens and all these other people that should not be voting, right? Convicted felons and all. So that's a check. But then on the sample size, I would say this: usually if it's listed on Real Clear Politics, which is where you should be going to see your polls, it's going to be a decent sample size. So under a national poll under 750 is really not worth looking at. The margin of error is 4%. It's probably not worth looking at. But then the problem with the big sample sizes is you'll get the Morning Consult that has bottomless pockets, and they'll put out a 10,000 person poll or something like that. So there's a difference between precision and accuracy. So, and sometimes because of the sample size, people will conflate that, and they'll look at Morning Consult and say, well, they're really, 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 really accurate. No, they're precise. There's a difference. So that poll will have a 1% margin of error, which is really tight, but they could be 5 points off because they predicted the wrong electorate and are oversampling Democrats or something like that. So generally, if I had the money to do a 10,000 person poll, I would way, way, way more prefer to do 2,000 person polls. You get way more information. But generally, if you see a poll from a major organization, it's going to be a good sample size. It's going to be probably registered likely voters. But what you want to see is what they disclose, because the most useful information in any of that is what the demographics look like, and then also any other questions they ask, because you can use those questions to benchmark against other stuff. Perfect example, in that Atlas poll that had Democrats up 9, they had Trump underwater by 6 points on the issue of immigration. that's loony. Like, that's why he got elected. He's not underwater on the issue of immigration. So automatically, if I put out a D+1 and it has Trump up on immigration, now all of a sudden you have some contextual information to understand who's closer to being accurate.
Okay. So that's very, very helpful. I like that what you're saying, and I hope that people that will listen to this will take that into consideration. I took away look at RCP for sure, which
Yep.
so for definite. You have recently been hinting. By the way, I love how you do your hints, and like I can't go to sleep because I'm waiting for the poll the next day. You're killing me. Anyway,
Sorry.
you have you you have been hinting that things are moving now. We're told there's no Democratic Party, that everybody's leaving, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
But you've been hinting that the numbers don't look good for Republicans right now, and this is crucial if we want to get that agenda pushed, and we want to do all the things we talked about before about RICO and attacking the extreme left and so on. We need a Republican House. So
Yeah.
what are you seeing? What's concerning you? What should we be doing? Because I know Scott Pressler's working his butt off, and he's already given us a warning.
Yeah. And I think things look bad for the Republicans to keep the House, but I think that they look good long term for a Republican Party if it can adopt the MAGA agenda. There's a bunch of structural reasons for that. The fact that Democrats are over gerrymandered in their states and the Republicans have room to grow, that the 2020 census was erroneous and can be fixed with the 2030 census, or hopefully fixed before then. There's all of this flight out of blue states that hasn't been tabulated yet into red states that will shift the map 10, 15 points. And then also the fact that if we ever get election integrity and investigation into the Democrat fundraising apparatus, I think we'll find that a lot of this money is probably laundered foreign capital, is my guess. So those are all the good long-term reasons why people will move to the right. But the problem is that historically the party in power just loses the House in the very next midterms. And then on top of that, we see the Democrats leading in the generic ballot. Now, congressional races are like really expensive, hard to do. There's 435 of them. There are only, I think, 13 marginal ones. I think 11 of those are Democrats. So that's another check in the Republican box where they might overperform. But it's going to be tight if they keep the House at all. And my problem is they promised a lot. Mike Johnson was riding around on Trump's plane making all these promises about what the Congress would do, and they've done nothing. And there's a bunch of rules and reasons, and they'll explain why it's so hard that DC works this way and we just can't do it and it's going to die in the Senate. But Americans don't understand and don't want to hear those excuses because they voted for Trump. It wasn't because Trump's like a snake oil salesman and everybody bought into his cult of personality. It's because they hated what Biden did to the country and they don't trust the federal government and they wanted it reformed. And so for Trump to come in and for the Republicans to act like the same way the government's been acting is a very bad look. And we've gotten a few numbers that show that there's problems when like 60% of Republican voters agree that Republicans in Congress aren't delivering on Trump's mandate, when only 38% of Trump 2024 voters have a very favorable impression of Republicans in Congress. Those are a bad sign. And the issue is that those people might say that they're going to vote for a Republican in the generic ballot, but then they just might not show up to vote. And the Democrats tend to show up to vote now. They are really good at ballot harvesting. They have a whole lot of insane white suburban liberals that will just vote. And that it looks like it could be really bad for Republicans. Now, how would they buck this historical trend and how would they fight this complacency that might settle over things? Well, I don't know. We'll see if the events of this last week change anything. But they should be doing things different, like actually passing the laws that Americans want. Americans voted for Trump. Let's codify every executive order. And Congress would say, oh, that's going to die in the Senate. Well, get rid of the filibuster limit. Just do it. They just did it today for judicial appointments. Yeah. You know the Democrats are going to do it. Absolutely, Democrats are going to do it when they get control of the Senate. So do it today and pass these laws. And I said that on Matt Gaetz' show. And you know what Matt Gaetz told me? The Republicans will never do it that way because then all their special interests can't get hooked up. the congressmen can't get paid. They can't flex their lobbyist power. So, but they can't count on the 18 to 29-year-olds too. Everybody says these people are more conservative, and they're not. Like, yes, Charlie Kirk is building a youth conservative movement, but these people are very confused, and they voted for Trump because they're angry at the system, and they're not going to vote for somebody like Romney. They're just not. And so Republicans have to lean into the MAGA agenda. They've got to talk like American first economic populists, and they don't.
Yeah, that's kind of, again, I've been concerned about what you've been hinting, and we have about a year here to go, so hopefully you can rack up some victories and as you say, start singing the right tune, and because I don't think we stop this this nefarious train unless we have 8 years. Otherwise, it's just a hiccup. They'll be right back, and we'll have pro-Iran people in the State Department sending them information. So we can't stop now. And that's, to me, in fact, that's why in my own state, I'm doing a lot of work on the CD races and make sure we have the right candidates. And it's very complex, I don't know if you follow Nevada politics, but it's always very complex. But we need to get one or two. It's three. We have 4 seats. 3 are Democrat. 2 are actually pretty vulnerable, but we never seem to be able to get the numbers at the end of the day. And we're working on that.
Well, I'd like for you to put me in touch with somebody out there who you think would be hit it off with me. Mostly, I get most of my local news just from connecting with like MAGA type candidates that are trying to fight the establishment. That's how I learned a little bit more about what's going on in California and stuff. And generally, the trend I hear is that, and a lot of people don't understand the Republican apparatus. You probably understand it way better than I do, but it's a very large and distributed set of multiple organizations. And those organizations have been around for a long time. They all have their own leadership layer, and they all tend to gravitate towards pragmatists that will just make whatever decision feels right for them at the time in order to help their candidate win. And so that might not necessarily mean aligning with a major national movement that's popular, because that might upset the status quo, and they're happy with the status quo. And so what I see all the time is a new, bright, up-and-coming MAGA candidate will win a district, but then gets pushed out by the Republican establishment because they're not going to play the consulting game, or there's somebody that's turned it as first, or all of these reasons. Or no, we'll let you run, but you can't run that way, and you got to take our consultants. I've heard all kinds of things like that. And just because Trump pushed out Ron McDaniel at the RNC doesn't mean that any of the organization has been changed at all. And so, like, people have been talking about the precinct strategy, and I think it's a great idea. But that's not going to fix anything, because you're just putting a bunch more pawns into a system that's ruled by people who haven't changed. So how do you change those people? I don't know. I think that, in my opinion, the most effective thing that can be done, and I've called for this multiple times, is that the main problem with the Republican Party is that it's still captivated by a limited set of big money donors that want the same thing that they wanted 30 years ago, which is like H-1B visas and globalization and blah, 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 like all the things you know of, a revolving door at the FDA, like everything, right? And so I don't think that's going to change until those people get circumvented by a new funding pipeline that can get to people that want to win. And I don't think those people can be in the NRCC, the RGA, the NRSC. So you need a way for money to get allocated to help non-establishment candidates win in kind of like a shadow organization, like a shadow RNC, one that actually wants to spend money instead of laundering it. Like the kind of stories I heard blow your mind. David Gillio out in California 13, he said, like, just this example, one of the consulting class Republicans, probably one of Kevin McCarthy's people, said, "Hey, you got to use this direct mailer, and they're going to cost you like X amount of dollars." And it was like a lot, like 100,000. And Dave was like, "Well, I don't want to spend that much. That seems like a lot, and you're mailing to all these areas, and I know I'm not going to get votes there. Why don't we just mail to this area?" And they're like, no, it has to be this way, because they want their buddy that prints the direct mailers to get money. So they're going to burn all this money, and then they don't even understand the polls. So I would love to poll for an organization that wants to use that information to help candidates win. And there's a Republican Party that not a single one of them is subscribed to our website. I send them crosstabs. They don't read them. I've only ever had contact with two legislative offices, Eric Schmidt and who's the other one? Yeah.
That's amazing, because what I find, just ridiculous about this is that you're already being accused of skewing right, so we might as well come to you, right? It's like,
the trend is that I do this all as a public service. You know what I mean? And again, I'm not a Republican. I'm not a conservative.
yeah.
I'm not MAGA. I'm not ultra right wing. I want the voters. First off, I want an American that my kids won't get radicalized or shot or die in some ditch in Eastern Europe, right? And I want voters to get what they want. And the trend is that they don't. And voters want what Trump promised, which is fix the federal government. That's what voters want. They want an economic system that allows them opportunity. And that's been stolen by crony capitalism and an entrenched kleptocracy. And so the Republicans aren't fixing that problem. And I want that problem fixed. And the Democrats are certainly not going to fix that problem. They're going to shoot people to keep it the way it is. And it ultimately comes down to, well, it's sad. I was talking to Eric. We had a short exchange on Twitter, Eric Weinstein, and he was talking about how captive all of the academic organizations are. And I said, well, what's your solution to that? And he said, well, endowed chairs. And I don't really understand how that works, but I guess the idea is that if you're phenomenally wealthy, you can buy a chair at one of these organizations and then force change. But the point comes back to every solution I've ever heard about how to fix this country means that there needs to be billionaires who will spend their money for the will of the people and not for their own benefit. And that doesn't seem like a viable solution to me. Because that's exactly what his solution is. It's exactly what my solution is. It's like, okay, who's going to put $1 billion to build a shadow RNC? And I don't think it's going to happen. I would love Elon Musk to do it, but he doesn't follow me. I don't know. The Koch brothers and the Club for Growth aren't going to do it.
Yeah.
And the other problem is the small dollar donations don't have any way to allocate their money towards this. They can donate to Trump, but Trump's not really doing this stuff either. They can send it to the RNC and it'll go to pay off all of Rona McDaniel's buddies.
And the limos,
$250 million
jets. Yeah.
So what did they do with that $250 million?
That was a big. We could have a whole show about the actual system and how I needed things to be disrupted. And we will probably, but I think that there is an established way that people do things, and the reason why I do my show is so that people get through that noise, and normal people get through that noise and actually vote in a certain way. Which is exactly what you said. There's an agenda that we want our kids to be safe. We want our streets to be safe. We want to fix the homeless problem. We don't believe in unfettered immigration that's going to dilute our country for no good reason. We want people to be like me, immigrants that come here and just love this country and will die for it. And we want the American dream to exist for everybody. And I think as long as, I think that, to me, that's what you represent, and that's what I'm going to keep promoting and supporting. So we'll get this figured out, and for the best of the people. Again, it's not about this side or this side; it's the people. I can't tell you again. I'm going to go back to one thing: the MAGA people that I met every time I spoke. Mark, they were like salt of the earth. I mean, this is what
Yeah.
this wasn't. There was no politics. There was no swearing at the other side. There was no. These were. They wanted their families to live the American dream, and they saw it right in front of their eyes disappear the last 4 years.
Yeah.
And
They're over decades, their entire society was stolen from them.
was stolen.
How dark it is for 18 to 29-year-olds and so different from the way I was brought up. They don't have adults they can trust. The dating pool is garbage. Their job pipeline is terrible. Everybody that they deal with on a daily basis is insane. There's like a 1 in 3 chance that they're on mental health medications. Like, it's really dark. I would say I think things are changing very rapidly now, and I'm concerned, but it's also expected. Is what, and I would just present a couple of numbers as evidence. One is that I don't think we've ever seen MAGA mad. I think we've seen MAGA demoralized and aghast, and like we've seen happy MAGA, we've seen exuberant MAGA. I don't think we've seen mad MAGA, and I don't know what that looks like, but that could come because one example is we just did snap polling on Irina Zarutska, and I'll just throw out, I don't want to go through all of it, but 5 years ago, the death penalty was 49% favorable, 36 against. So what's that? Plus 13. Mm-hmm. In this particular case, it was 60-20, including a majority of Democrats want the murderer executed. So that's a 27-point shift. And I think most of that shifting was very recently. So there is very much an appetite to see capital justice. And I think we'll see that too with Charlie Kirk's shooter. I think we'll see that many more times. I think Trump is going to see what this looks like and then proceed. And some of these people are cottage heroes now for the left, like Luigi Mangione, if he gets an execution. So I think we might see that happen. And then the other thing is the issue with the young ones. So they are Trumpier than any generation. They've been moving more and more towards Trump. And everybody on the right's patting themselves on the back because they think that means they're going to vote Republican, and they are not. So we just asked a whole bunch of questions about these people. And even the ones who say they're conservative and Republican are overwhelmingly socialist. They believe in excess wealth confiscation. They believe in income caps. They believe in nationalizing major industries. And right now, according to my numbers, they have a 17% unemployment rate. And I'm already hearing, I just put a tweet out today, like, hey, people who work in Fortune 500s, what's the attitude out there? And it's like despair, rolling layoffs, like hunkering down. And so what does it look like if there's an economic hard landing and we get a 25% youth unemployment rate where 40% of them have been diagnosed with a mental condition and they're super socialist? Those are things that we're probably going to see sometime in the next year or two. And I don't want to get into it, but as you've probably talked about it, it's the fourth turning. We're at the end of the fourth turning. History tells us a major crisis of some type is coming, and that's what will reorder society, because it just doesn't look like Trump's doing all the right things. It just doesn't look like he can do it himself.
Exactly. And we need to help, and anybody that can should. And we'll see. My biggest, I don't know if you knew this, but, my parents came from Lebanon, and I was in the Civil War when I was 15. And
Oh, wow.
I'm seeing way too many parallels between Beirut, in 1975 and America 2020, 2025. And that has to stop. And I think that's what my book's going to be about. We can't have a civil war. We cannot have a civil war because it is the worst. Cousins killing cousins and teammates killing teammates and divided families. And if you look at some of the basic, there are like 7 or 8 reasons when a civil war might happen, and you're very familiar with all of them because you poll all of them. We're close. We're close, and that can't happen. Yeah. So anyway,
finish that book fast. I want to read that book. I really want to read it.
I will let you know.
43. Yeah, we poll, and 43% of America thinks a civil war is likely in the next few years. And I think that it's much more likely that the left it's much more likely, in my opinion, that leftist accelerationist brinksmanship will bring us there, as opposed to a violent rightist uprising under somebody like Biden. And it all comes down to like Newsom and Pritzker and Murphy and Hochul and how far they want to push back against what Trump is doing for crime is probably the most salient, obvious way it could start. And will it? I don't think so. But that's the setup, right? It's like, okay, Trump sends federal troops into Chicago, and what does Pritzker do?
Yeah, yeah. It's exactly these kind of things. And of course, whatever they do when there's a Democrat, and Texas and Florida do the same as these guys did, you know,
Yeah.
and that's when you get MAGA mad, and we've got to be careful. So anyway, well, this was an incredible discussion. I'm very, very excited about this. I'm going to continue liking and following you. And when you do those little teasers, I have to take I have to take melatonin to go to bed that night because I'm waiting for the next day.
Sorry.
So
I'm just trying to make polling interesting. Well, you just got yourself a new follower too, and I'm going to read about Lebanon in 75 right now. So
thank you so much.